that is IBO 4, and today we'll be starting with IBO 01. So IBO 01 has got 5 units. We'll be discussing one by one out of them. In Unit 1, we have got Export Import Trade Regulatory Framework. Let me tell you once again. Unit 1 is Export Import Trade Regulatory Framework. So here, excuse me, we'll be discussing actually 5 units, but one by one, from 1, 2, 3, 4, like this. After finishing 5 units today, we'll take up another class, that is to take IBO 02. Just like that, IBO 03, IBO 04, in 4 days, I will be taking all these things. So now, we'll be taking the first one, that is IBO 01 Unit 1, Export Import Trade Regulatory Framework. So first of all, the objectives of this will be after studying this unit, you should be able to describe the legal framework of foreign trade, then explain the objectives of India's export-import policy, then describe the procedures of registration, formalities, and export licensing, explain the general provisions regarding exports and imports, discuss the major provisions of exports, and explain the major provisions of imports. So these are the objectives of this unit. And today, let me start with the introduction, that is 1.1. So there are 2 objectives of Indian trade policy. First one is to promote exports, and number 2, to restrict the level of imports as per availability of foreign exchange. Now, there are some key factors, that is, in short run, imports can be financed by foreign aids and borrowings. So these are the 2 sources from which we can have our imports and finance them. And in the long run, however, imports must be financed by earnings from exports. That means whatever exports will be there and the sale proceeds can be utilized in order to import goods. Otherwise, what happens? The balance of payment will be not good for our country. So in the short run, although we are going to rely on some aids and borrowings, but later on, we have to, in the long run rather, we have to import only by exporting. That means whatever proceeds we'll be getting by exporting, that can be utilized in order to import. This revolves around the instruments and techniques of export promotion and import management. What does it mean? It means all these activities, that is import or export, in short, the foreign trade, can take place through the instruments and techniques of export promotion and import management. In this unit, we will discuss objectives of export-import policy, number 1. Number 2, registration formalities, then licensing procedure, and number 4, major provisions of exports and imports. Now let us take an overview of legal framework, that is 1.2. Sorry. Foreign trade consists of outward and inward movements of goods and services, resulting in inflow and outflow of foreign exchange. So there are 2 directions of foreign trade. What is first one is import, then export, or you can make it export and import. So when we are exporting, there will be inflow of foreign exchanges, while in case of importing, there will be outflow of foreign exchange. Now, Foreign Trade Development and Registration Act 1992 governs foreign trade in India. all the foreign trade activities will be governed according to this act. That is Foreign Trade Act 1992. Secondly, payments for export-import trade in foreign exchange is regulated under another act that is called Foreign Exchange Management Act 1999. So these are the two, you can say, main acts which will govern the foreign trade. There are another two also, that is Customs Act 1962 and Export Quality Control and Inspection Act 1963. What are their functions? Physical operation of both goods and services are conducted through various modes of transport. This is regulated under Customs Act 1962. Similarly, for keeping the image of the country, quality control and pre-shipment inspection is made under the Export Quality Control and Inspection Act 1963. Let me explain this point again. That is, by this act, that is Export Quality Control and Inspection Act 1963. This is because our image, the image of our country should be always upheld. So we cannot just export bad quality goods so that we will be losing our image. That's why there will be quality control, and again before shipment, that is pre-shipment inspection will have to be made in order to ensure that whatever goods we are exporting, that quality is good. So this Quality Control and Inspection Act 1963 will be applicable. So these are the four important acts. There are other rules and regulations in addition to this, but these are the four main acts. For transportation, cargo insurance, international conventions, etc., we have more rules and regulations in addition to these four important acts. Now we'll be coming to Foreign Trade Development and Regulation Act 1992 and Foreign Trade Regulation Rules 1993 and Foreign Trade Order 1993, which are now in vogue. So the primary objective, you can see it in para 2. So first of all, there is Export-Import Policy of India, and amendments to any policy provisions are made under this act. Then permissions for import-export is also given under this act by granting the Importer-Exporter Code number. Please remember IEC, that is Importer-Exporter Code. So this IEC plays a vital role in the export and import trade. Then provisions relating to appeal and revision will be also made under this act. Then powers under the Code of Criminal Procedure 1973 relating to searches and seizures, etc., will be also a part of this. Then Code of Civil Procedure 1908 for making any adjudication or hearing any appeal, etc., are provided by this act. So these are in short the Foreign Trade Development and Regulation Act 1992, etc. Then we'll be coming to Foreign Exchange Management Act, that will be getting in 1.2.2 1999. Foreign Exchange Management Act 1999. There are two things, that is FERA or Foreign Exchange Regulation Act 1973 has replaced all the exchange control acts since 1939, 1947, etc. So what we'll be getting is now Foreign Exchange Management Act 1999, or in short it is called FERA. This and FERA Amendment 1993 have been replaced by Foreign Exchange Management Act, that is FEMA, in 1999. So the latest is the Foreign Exchange Management Act, that is FEMA. This act has been brought to consolidate and amend the laws relating to foreign exchange. It facilitates external trade and payments and promotes the orderly development and maintenance of foreign exchange market in India. It also deals with holding and transactions of foreign exchange, export of goods and services, realization and repatriation of foreign exchange. Repatriation means when we are giving foreign exchange. Role of authorized persons, contravention and penalties, adjudication and appeal, powers of the Directorate of Enforcement, etc. So these are the functions of this FEMA, Foreign Exchange Management Act 1999. Now we'll be coming to the Customs Act 1.2.3. You can get it. The Customs Act 1962. It repeals 3 previous acts, that is more for modes of transportation, sea, land, and air. And now the primary objectives of this is, first of all, regulating the genuine export and import trade, check smuggling, collect revenue, undertake functions on behalf of other agencies, collect or gather trade statistics. So these are the main functions of this Customs Act. We are dealing with all these things through this Customs Act 1962. Now coming to the last one, that is 1.2.4, Export Quality Control and Inspection Act 1963. This act prohibits the export of substandard goods. The Export Inspection Council, that is EIC, on January 1st, 1964, and the Export Inspection Agencies, EIS, are established to facilitate smooth operation of this act. EIS inspects and issue certificate of export worthiness, whether it is export worthy or not. Now we'll be coming to objectives of export and import policy. The first objective is promoting exports and augmenting exchange earnings. So main purpose is to earn more foreign exchange. So export is made for that. So this is one of the most important objectives of export-import policy. Then the second one is regulating exports for avoiding competition among the Indian exporters and ensuring domestic availability of essential goods at reasonable price. Not that we will be exporting all the goods which we are producing, because then there will be scarcity in our own country. In order to consume it inside the country, it will not be available, or if available, at a very high cost. So in order to avoid that, the policy looks at it. Sorry. Then the registration formalities and export licensing. In order to export, one has to get IEC number, as I have already told you, and RCMC. What is RCMC? That is registration cum membership certificate. So export licensing is having one negative list that consists of which items cannot be exported. So these are prohibited items like wildlife, beef, human skeleton, etc. And number 2 is restricted items can be exported and imported as per license only. Without license, it cannot be imported or exported. Then some canalized items, only authorized agents by the Director General of Foreign Trade, they can do it, others cannot. Now we'll be coming to general provisions regarding exports and imports. The new policy has further liberalized exports and imports. Here, export-import is free unless regulated. Then compliance with law, Foreign Trade Development and Regulation Act 1992, just now we have discussed. Then interpretations as per EXIM policy, third-party exports, green card holders, more than 50, who are the green card holders? More than 50% of their production subject to a minimum turnover of ₹1 crore. If that is the case with you, you will enjoy a lot of concessions. This gives automatic licensing, customs clearance, etc. Then this comprises of this foreign trade, as we have already discussed. It comprises of 2 things, exports and imports. So these are the things in unit 1. Now we'll be switching over to unit 2, that is export sales contract. Exports and imports are, exporters and importers. They are residents of different countries. Goods have to cross the frontiers in order to be sent or in order to be received. So both physical and financial risks are involved in it. Law of both the countries are to be observed. The terms of contracts should be very clear so that misunderstandings and disputes can be cleared in future, if at all it arises. An Indian exporter has to show a documentary proof of an export contract. We will learn in this unit the following things. We will learn here, first of all, nature of export sales contract, and number 2, provisions of Incoterms. This is a very useful term, Incoterms, and methods of settlement of disputes. Then, nature of export sales. What is the nature of export sales contract? Section 2, subsection H of Indian Contract Act 1872, which is even now in vogue, defines a contract as an agreement which can be enforced by law. A valid offer and acceptance by the other party is essential for a contract. So this is also applicable to import-export trade too. Form of a contract, whether there is any form or not. As such, there is no form for this. However, some documentary evidence like a letter or a telex message or an electronic data interchange or purchase order or letters of credit can act as the form. So in the form, as there is no prescribed form, any of these documents will serve that purpose. Now, what is the distinction between domestic and export sales contract? Since the law of two countries are involved in export and import trade, the parties to the contract may mutually agree about the applicability of particular country's law. Mostly, it is the place where the delivery is to take place. That is, the law of the exporting country will generally hold. Although, in some cases, the other country is also, it is possible to operate through the other country's law too. Now, coming to international contract terms. To avoid disputes, the International Chambers of Commerce, that is ICC Paris, has developed Incoterms. I was telling about these Incoterms. So these Incoterms have been developed by International Chamber of Commerce, or ICC in short, Paris. The current version of Incoterms has been issued in 1990. So as in 1990, this current form or current version of Incoterms has been issued. Now that is in book. So what are the terms? The terms used in this are these Incoterms. Ex works. What is ex works? Ex works means the buyer bears all expenses right from the seller's premises. That means if we want to, suppose, import some goods from UK, then we have to arrange all the expenses. All the expenses will have to be borne by us right from the point of manufacture. The manufacturer or the seller or the exporter in that country has nothing to do. We have to do everything, and we have to bear all the costs and risks too. The second one is pre-carrier, that is FCA. Pre-carrier means the seller has to deliver to the carrier only, the carrier in which it will be sent, like to the ship or to the port, etc. Only in that carrier they will put. up to that the expenses are theirs. But beyond that point, all the other expenses will have to be borne by the importer. Then the third one is free alongside ship, or FAS. Free alongside ship means we have to, the exporter will have to take the goods at his own cost alongside the ship. That means it will not load, that stevedoring is not required. Only up to the side of the ship, you have to take the goods. All the other expenses, including your freight, your loading, unloading, all these things, insurance, everything will have to be borne by the importer. Then the next step is free on board. Free on board means you have to load it on the ship. Free on board. That means the exporter will have to bear that expense also, that stevedoring, that is keeping or sending the goods up to the ship. On the ship, loading will have to be made by his cost. Then other expenses will have to be made by the importer. Then cost and freight, C&F. You must have heard this term, cost and freight. Cost and freight means in addition to the FOB, one more item, that is the freight. Freight means the charge which the ship will take for carrying the goods from England to India, suppose. So that will have to be given by the exporter. That freight will also be borne by the exporter. Then CIF. Now during the voyage, if something happens, suppose it is sunk in a sea, then everything is lost. So who will bear that loss? Who will bear that risk? That risk is to be covered by an insurance company. Again, the insurance is of three types. That is your hull insurance for the ship, then cargo insurance for the goods, and then freight insurance, whatever freight, because freight is also in lakhs of rupees. So that is also covered by insurance companies. So these insurance expenses will have to be also borne by the exporter in this case. That is in case of CIF, cost insurance freight. Then there are other types also more advanced, that is the delivered duty paid, DDP, then rights and duties. So all these, there are 7 more types also that you can go through the booklet. Then we'll be coming to rights and duties under principal Incoterms. So actually I have already told you what are the, these are the Incoterms which we have already given you: XW, FCA, FS, FOB, CF, C&F, CIF, DPP, etc. So these things, how the rights and duties under principal Incoterms will be done, I have already explained. Who will bear what? What are the risks to be borne under which term? So this Incoterm is very important, on which the trade is being done. Then coming to general conditions in export contracts. Export contracts mention the rights of both the parties against the party failed to honor his contractual obligations except under some valid reasons. That means if you are exporting, you have to export it, you have to send it. If you are not sending, but with some valid reasons, then it may so happen that you will not be punished, but otherwise you will be punished. You have to give fine for that. So who will bear the risk or loss, to what point, is mentioned in these general conditions. Following aspects are covered. Under this, there are 24 jurisdictions. The parties will be, that is in 2.5, you can see the long list is there. Then we'll be coming to special contracts. As discussed in 2.3, that is different Incoterms. The responsibility of bearing costs and risks under various terms above are already clearly spelled out. But for the sake of convenience, a party may perform some duties of the other party as agreed upon. It makes a contract a special contract. I shall give you one example in order to clear here. Suppose the freight expenses will have to be borne by the exporter in UK. Then it is okay. But if it is not cost and freight, but only free on board, they are not liable to bear any freight. So what happens? The freight will have to be paid in UK only. So we may request, that means we being the importers, may request the exporter that although it is free on board, you should not bear the freight expenses, but please bear the freight expenses which we are going to reimburse. So if we request and they will do it conveniently there, then it is so far so good. So if this clause is added to that, it becomes a special contract. Coming to frustration of contract, that means when the contract will not be fulfilled due to reasons beyond a party's power, such as flood, war, fire in the factory, labor strike, etc. The contract may not be completed. So these are all supervening impossibilities that is not within the hands of the exporter. So in that case, he will fail to export the goods. This is termed as frustration of contracts, force majeure, relief, etc. in different countries. Actually, this frustration of contracts, that is in England, and this force majeure in Paris, France, and relief, etc., that is in Russia. So that is different in different countries. These are the terms used for frustration of contracts. In this case, a party will not be liable to pay damage to the other party because it is not within his control. He is not intentionally not sending the goods. It is due to supervening impossibility that he is unable to send the goods. So he should not be fined. So in case of frustration of contracts, the sender or the exporter is not liable to pay damage to the other party. Then coming to methods of dispute settlement. Disputes may arise due to the quality. If one quality has been sent, but another quality has been sent really, which has not been shown in the sample. So there will be dispute. Then failure to ship in time. If suppose the shipping of woolen goods should have been made in the month of August or September, so that from October, November, December, January, it can be used, it can be sold easily. But if in the month of January it will be sent after 4 months, then there is no use. So for that there may be some dispute. Sorry. Then failure to ship in time, then government regulations restricting exports, etc. So these are the reasons why there will be a dispute. So in order to settle the disputes, there are two ways, two methods. One is litigation, another is arbitration. Litigation means this is the machinery for settlement of dispute through judicial process. It is slow and time-taking and expensive. So naturally, it is not acceptable to all. So the other alternative of settlement of disputes is arbitration. So this is inexpensive and also fast. Therefore, arbitration is preferred to litigation. Now we'll be coming to next unit, that is unit 3. In unit 3, export-import documentations, that is documents, we'll be reading, just a minute. The various useful documents are prepared and submitted for smooth movement of goods from the country to another country, from one country to another country. As we know, in case of import and export, this thing happens. That is, various useful documents are prepared and submitted for smooth movement of goods from one country to another country. So, naturally, some documents will be required. Now, what is the rationale of document? That means what is the need of these documents? Let us discuss the rationale of documents. The commercial practices and legal systems are different in two countries. What we are following may not be followed by another country. What English people are following in their country, that is UK, we in India may not follow it. For ensuring the interest of both the exporter and importer, therefore, certain documentary formalities are essential. So if there will be some documents, then it can be used in order to avoid these difficulties, because these documents must have been prepared with the consent of both the countries. Therefore, the rationale of document number one is the commercial practices and legal systems are different in two countries. For ensuring the interest of both exporter and importer, certain documentary formalities are essential. Secondly, documentation is linked with the claims of export incentives of different countries. Documentation is linked with the claims of export incentives of different countries. Now, what are these export incentives? If we are exporting from India, then definitely, as I have discussed with you, that there will be inflow of funds, inflow of foreign exchange. So, as it is required that India should earn as much as possible so far as the foreign exchanges are concerned, Government of India also gives some concessions and some privileges, or you can say some incentives to the exporters. So those those exporters can get these incentives by showing these documents. So these documents will be of necessity at that time when they will claim certain incentives which has been given by the government. Okay, then so the documents is like a document and documentation is linked with the claim of export incentives of different countries. Thus, documents are needed to comply with commercial, legal, and incentive requirements. Actually, all the requirements or the total requirements of this documentation can be read under three headings. There are three types. One is commercial, another is legal, and another is incentive requirements. We'll discuss in detail all these three, that is commercial, legal, and incentive requirements. So the kinds and functions of documents we are going to read. We'll start with commercial documents. Commercial document, also known as shipping document. In short, it is called shipping document. So shipping documents or commercial documents enable both the parties to discharge their obligation. When goods are shipped by an exporter, he has the documents which entitles him to the goods at the destination, or in case of damage, to compensation by insurance. So there are two purposes here so far as the commercial documents are concerned. First of all, it will enable, through these documents only, you can prove your ownership of the goods. So when your authority will be given to somebody, some agent, etc., in the foreign country where these goods have been imported from you, they can show that document, that authority of yours, and because you are the owner, by which is proved by showing those documents, so this serves the purpose of your ownership. So once you are declared the owner, or once you are considered the owner, there should not be any difficulty in getting the goods by your agent. Then the agent will do the deed. That is one. Secondly, suppose it could not reach the destination, but before that, due to some risk or due to some reason or the other, it has been destroyed or it has been lost, it has been wasted. So in that case, you will claim compensation from your insurance company because you have insured it. So that insurance company will also require these documents, these commercial documents. Without the commercial document, the insurance company will deny the claims made by you in order to compensate. Then, what are the commercial documents? So these are commercial invoice, bill of lading or AROA bill, post parcel receipts, insurance policy, certificate, insurance policy certificate, and bill of exchange, etc. Moreover, packing list, certificate of inspection, and quality control, etc. are also necessary. So these are all included under the heading commercial documents. One minute. Okay. Then we'll be coming to legal regulatory documents. There are two categories of legal regulatory documents. Documents needed in the exporting country, that is IEC number, we have already discussed, RCMC, then GR form, PP form, BP or COD form, then subtext form, then shipping bills. Four types of shipping bills are there. So all these are documents needed in the exporting country. So these are legal regulatory, these are under legal regulatory documents. Then documents needed in importing country. Export is made. So now we'll be coming to the importing country. In the importing country, what documents are required? So that is consular invoice, then customs invoice, then legalized invoice, certified invoice, certificate of origin, and health or veterinary or sanitary certificate. So these are the documents which are required in the importing country. So all these things have got their own weightage, importance. So nothing can be avoided. Now we'll be coming to documents for claiming incentives. That is the third type, documents for claiming incentives. I have already told you how for claiming incentives, these documents will be required and what are the incentives given by the government that I have discussed. So they will include forwarding note, wagon registration fee receipt. That means you have to reserve some wagons in order to carry the goods from the port to your destination. So you will need wagon registration fee receipt. You must have given fee for that. So that receipt is required. Then shipping order, AR4 and 5, form for rebate in central excise, for duty drawback customs attested copy of shipping bill, etc. will come under these documents for claiming incentives. So in this year, we have discussed three kinds of documents and their functions. One is commercial documents, second one is legal regulatory documents, and the third one is documents for claiming incentives. Now we'll come to 3.4, standardized pre-shipment export documents. Before the shipment, that is pre-shipment documents are also there. So that will be called standardized pre-shipment export documents because these documents are standardized. Standardized means what? Suppose one country will do in one way, another country will do in another way. So when you will be searching for some common region, what should be the point here? They will differ. So in order to make it standardized, they sit together and then it has been formed. So the standardized pre-shipment export documents, pre-shipment you are understanding that is before the shipment, before sending it. Aligned document system for economy, speed, accuracy, and convenience. 17 out of 25 documents can be prepared from only 2 master documents. There will be 2 master documents From that, 17 documents can be prepared, and under these aligned documents, all total 25 documents are required. Out of that, 17 documents can be prepared only from two master documents under the aligned documentation system. And what the merit of it? This is economical, and it will ensure speed and also accuracy and convenience. So these are the benefits which we are getting. Now, there are two types of commercial documents. One is principal export documents, another is auxiliary export documents. And number two, regulatory documents are government departments like RBI, Customs Department, Central Excise Department, etc. require it before shipment of goods. They include export application, dock challan, port trust copy of shipping bill, etc. So these are the two types of documents which will be required before shipment. That's why it is called pre-shipment export documents. One minute. So regarding this standardized pre-shipment export, that is one. Commercial documents are of two types, and then regulatory documents that are like for the use of the government departments before the shipment. This will be required, as we have already discussed. So then the import documents. Now the shipment has been made, the ship has left, and it has reached the port of the importing country. So in the importing country, also some documents will be required. That is important import documents. They will be called import documents. These will include importer exporter code, that is IEC number, bill of entry, etc. So these import documents are also equally essential at the time of importing. That is one aspect of the foreign trade. So in this way, we have already discussed in this unit 3 all types of documents which are required for foreign trade. Okay. Now we'll be coming to unit 4. Unit 4. This unit is regarding electronic data interchange EDI system. I hope you have all gone through all these booklets, that is your study materials, and then only it will be easy to understand all these things. Because in short span of time, it is not actually possible to cover everything in detail. So as from my experience, I am telling, I have been teaching in this IGNOU. I have got that DDE degree also. So from 92 onwards, I am teaching in this IGNOU. But the main thing is, these are very useful and very well prepared study materials, which will give you a precise idea about all these things. But the thing is, you have to understand everything. and once or twice you have to give an intensive reading. So now coming to this electronic data interchange or EDI system, that is unit 4. Here, what are the objectives of this unit? So after studying this unit, you should be able to describe electronic data interchange system, explain the benefits of EDI. EDI is electronic data interchange, and then describe the business use of EDI, then differentiate between standards used for EDI, relate the bar ending technology with EDI, explain the role of value added networks. So it is something to do with this computer, software, hardware, etc. So first of all, what is the purpose of this EDI or electronic data interchange system? The purpose of this is to cut short paperwork, because huge paperwork will be required. So many documents are there. So everything can be done through this electronic media. So here, to cut short paperwork and to facilitate smooth flow of information from receiving of order to supply of the goods by using computer system. This is the purpose. This is the purpose of EDI or electronic data interchange system. Now coming to the definition of EDI. EDI is defined as the direct transfer of business information between computer systems in different organizations using widely agreed standards to structure the transaction or message data. Again, one more definition is also there. The transfer of structured data by commonly agreed message standards from computer to computer by electronic means. This is another definition accepted by the world. So here, this EDI is the direct transfer of business information between computer systems in different organizations. Now, the manual work has been reduced. Due to this, the manual work will be reduced. The paperwork will be reduced. As a result of which, the time spent will be less. Chances of inaccuracy will be less. The repeated work will not be done. Everything is there in the computer and you can get it in a flick of a second. So this is the utility of this EDI. So in detail, let us know what are the benefits of EDI. In 4.3, you can get the benefits of EDI. The benefits can be classified into strategic, operational, and opportunity. Three classifications are there. One is strategic, then operational, and third one is opportunity. It results in direct cost savings. 1/10 of cost is only required. If you do it by paper, if you have to spend 10,000 rupees, if you use this EDI system, only 1,000 rupees will be required. So the cost reduction is 90%. It can prevent clerical errors also, because once it has been correctly typed, then it will be repeated. So there is less clerical error. But if it will be written so many times in hand or in typing, then there will be errors, typing errors, or your clerical errors will be there. So this can be also avoided. EDI can shorten the lead time between receipt and fulfillment of orders. What do you mean by lead time? Lead time refers the time required from receiving the order, then sending it, then it reaching the ultimate importer. So whatever time is required, that is called lead time. So this lead time will be considerably reduced between receipt and fulfillment of orders. Now, there are other benefits also, like let me discuss it. The strategic benefits will be, these benefits will affect the central operating function of the organization. These include faster trading cycle, just-in-time manufacturing. Just-in-time manufacturing means whenever it is required, it is manufactured. It is not for storing purpose. No need of storing and spending money on storage and insurance, etc. Just in time. Then terms of trade affected by bargaining power, need to excuse me, need to respond to highly competitive market contracts, then access to new markets, then closer relationship with key business partners. Then coming to the operational benefits, I told you there are three types of benefits. One is strategic, another is operational, another is opportunity. Coming to the operational benefits, these benefits will affect the daily operation of the company, day-to-day working of the company. Usually, its impact is on certain departments within the organization. These include reduced costs. I have told you how 90% cost is reduced. Reduced cost, that is on paper and postage bills cut. Then reduction in money tied up in stock. Just in time, I was explaining that whenever required, it will be produced and sent, or it will be dispatched. So in this way, you can also save money when you are tying up the stock. That means unnecessary blockage of stock. There will be insurance, there will be interest, etc. So those expenses can be avoided. Then manual processing costs are also there, that can be also avoided. In addition to that, improved cash flows. Naturally, cash flows will be improved. You can get it immediately. Then security and error reduction. So it can eliminate the errors and also ensure the security of documents. Because if someone takes the copy of it, if it is handwritten, but here everything is in your under the lock and key, that is in the computer, so it will not be stolen. So security, from security point of view, it is also better. Then coming to the opportunity benefits, the opportunity benefits will include enhanced image, competitive edge, and improved corporate trading relationship. These are the 3 points to be noted so far the opportunity benefits are concerned. So not necessarily crucial to the current operations of the company, but can be seen as to offer potential future benefits. The list of opportunity benefits includes such as enhanced image and competitive edge. Others which, although perceived as beneficial, are difficult to quantify. So these are the benefits I told you under the 3 headings. And now from the industry perspectives, that is commerce, transport, etc. This is also beneficial. From commerce point of view, trade and industry, then manufacturing, finance and banking, then tourism and travel. This will hold good in all these areas. Then transport, coming to transport, road transport, rail transport, air transport, and sea transport. In all types of transportations also, this will hold good. Then forwarding and dispatching, then warehousing, governmental, and customs and excise, then national and international trade, then the statistics. So all these things will be benefited by this. Now we'll be coming to key components of EDI system. Key components of an EDI system. So the key elements of an EDI are computer hardware, communication software, translation software, application software, and telecommunication networks. If you want it in detail, this you will be getting in 4.4. So these are, again, let me repeat it: computer hardware, communication software, translation software, application software, and telecommunication networks. So these are the key components of EDI system. Without even one of them, you cannot carry on with EDI. So these are very essential. First of all, computer hardware is required. Then communication software, through which there are different softwares you must have known. That is for communication. Then translation software, sometimes it is required. Then application software, and lastly, network, that is telecommunication network. Then EDI and bar coding. What is bar? Yes, a barcode is a machine. I'm sorry. A barcode is a machine readable representation of human readable information. So there are certain information which we are going through, which for our benefit, for our use, and these can be also read by the machines also. But the machine cannot read in that way. There should be bars. Bars are nothing but small lines and gaps. So these are the bars. So they are printed. What are the bars? They are printed symbols consisting of bars and spaces that contain coded information which can quickly be read by scanning equipment. If a scanning equipment is there, human mind cannot read it, but a scanning equipment will be used in order to read it very easily. Depending on which barcode, language, or symbology is being used, the information can be made up of letters, numbers, special characters, etc. The information is generally printed in human readable form under the barcode for visual checking. For visual checking, however, it will be translated and we can read it. Alternatively, it may be omitted from printing to provide a form of security. Directly, the printer will recognize it and can do it, read it. The barcoding exercise a specific problem associated with either internal or external data capture. Mention the possible role of barcoding in an EDI project, and you are likely to be met with a blank stare or even a look of horror. Venturing into EDI for the first time, organizations concentrated their minds on the possible changes to business processes and procedures and the technology required to send messages from one company to another. So these are shortcuts, rather, you can say, in a coded manner. All these things can be read through scanning machineries or scanning equipments. So So you have understood what is a barcoding and how it is being used in EDI system. Then coming to EDI standards. What is EDI standard? This is EDI standards. EDI cannot work without standardization, as various parties like exporters, importers, custom authorities, trade forwarders, shipping lines use it. So this EDI will not be used only by the importer or the exporter, but all the persons concerned which are coming within the purview of all these transactions of import and export trade, they will also be involved. So EDI should be a chapter in their studies also, so that they can use it and they can, who are those parties? Let us discuss it again. Uh, if standardization is made by all these parties like exporters, importers, custom authorities, forwarders, shipping lines, etc., then only they can understand. If I shall tell in one way and my customs authorities will not recognize it, then they will harass me. Similarly, if the freight forwarders will not understand it, how can they forward it? How can they send it? Similarly, the shipping lines also use it. So everything should be standardized. It should be understandable by all these parties concerned. So standardization is the EDI messages plays an important role when information has to be communicated between the computers. EDI cannot work without standardization, as EDI will involve diverse parties like exporters, importers, custom authorities, freight forwarders, and shipping lines. Communication would break down if interchanging partners did not follow agreed standards, leading them from an intolerable mountain of paper documents to an electronic tower of Babel, especially in international EDI. So, especially in international EDI, this has to be followed. A standardization will have to be followed so that all the parties concerned, they can interpret it. Now, there is more than one, or more accurately, more than one syntax upon which the EDI messages are built. So there are different technical terms, that is ANSI 10 and then ANSI ASC 10, etc. All these things you can go through that chapter in 4.6. Then this AD-fact. AD-fact covers, this is one of the techniques, adopting AD-fact message standards for that use in their international trade operations. Countries which have already implemented EDI are either using AD-fact message standards or planning to use it. So what is this AD-fact message? AD-fact covers standardization in 5 main areas. That is data elements, then syntax rules, then message, segment, and codes. So this is all about your AD-fact, because AD-fact is becoming more and more popular nowadays. It has to, which deals with all these things. That is data elements, a unit of data for which the field specifications are defined. For example, data element can consist of details relating to buyer, seller, description, goods description, and value. That means all the data, that it just serves just like a data bank. All the data collected will be recorded here. Then syntax rules. It is a command or the grammar for writing a message. It can also be defined as the rules for writing a structured message. So just like when you are using any literature, naturally, while writing something, there are some idioms and phrases and all these grammatical rules. So by using those rules only, we can write a correct stanza. So here also the same thing happens. These syntax rules is nothing but the grammar behind all this type of electronic data recording. Then message, a set of information stored in a predefined format along with the precise function. Messages are equivalent to documents. What is the real message? That will have to be written in the document. So this is nothing but a document. This is an electronic document which is replacing the message in writing, that is in handwriting. Then segment. Segment is the immediate unit of information in a message which equates to sentence in a passage. So these are the things which you should know when EDI will be in work. Then codes. Codes are used as abbreviations. The EDIFACT codes are built upon the existing ISO codes such as country codes, location codes, etc. You must have known your IFC code, country code, your what do you call it, PIN code, etc. So just like that, there are some codes which will be used. Then you can read those messages and directories, etc. So this is all in standards exists for you to benefit. This will give you benefit. Choosing the right messages. All the messages are not equal. So all these things will have to be known. Then we'll come to value added network services, that is insert VANS, VANS, value added network services. So before going in detail to these VANS, let me tell you what is value added. What is value added? When you are coming to say class 1 or standard 1 and you have not learned anything, then something will be added to your education. You will learn letters, you will learn numbers, etc. So by that time, by the time you finish standard 1, you are well versed with these letters and uh, your different characters. Okay. So some value has been added to your education. Similarly, by the time you have passed your HSC standard or standard 10, then you are expert in, suppose, in some arithmetics or mere calculations, little bit of trigonometry, little bit of English with grammar, etc. So all these things you have added to your educational value. So this way value is added. Similarly, in a product, value is also added. When a raw material is there and we work on it, we give it a proper shape and size, and sometimes we change the form of it, then it becomes more more usable. So that way we are giving or we are adding value. So that is value added. So here value added network services means in the network system also, that is your EDI, etc. What we have already discussed, that is through electronic media, we are also doing all these things. So there is a particular network, and these network services when will be of different values, more values, we can say that we have added some values. That is value added network services, or in short, we call it VANS, VANS. To support the communication requirements of industry and its large number of uses, VAN is used. Major VAN operator in India is VSNL. That is the most important major VAN operator. In the private sector, there are other companies like Satyam, Global Telecom Services, then Mahindra Network are the key players in private sector. Otherwise, mainly we deal with BSNL, Videsh Sanchar Nigam Limited. So this is the full form of this BSNL. So now we'll come to business approaches to EDI. What is this business approaches? So what are the, I forgot, what the benefit of a ban? It was clear from the outset that any organization committed to EDI would have a requirement to communicate with a large number of different organizations, whether these be suppliers, distributors, banks, etc. The function of the ban, therefore, was to provide a single channel to facilitate this type of communication. The ban support links to their networks for all of the main computer hardware and software operating environments. When you join a ban, you need only be concerned about your link to the network, whether it be from a PC or mini or mainframe computer. What your what your customers or suppliers use to connect to the network need not concern you at all, as the ban will take care of it automatically, individual connections to their services. So these are the utilities of the ban. Then there is mailboxing, security, how do you choose a ban, etc. All these things are there in that 4.7. Now we come to the last part of this unit, that is 4.8, business approaches to EDI. So what are the business approaches to EDI? It is often difficult to quantify. It is often difficult to quantify the effect of EDI on the day-to-day running of business. EDI has emerged as a business tool. It supports some of the key management philosophies of the day, like just-in-time, efficient consumer response, etc. So these are the benefits, you can say, how it will be, how different business approaches will be made to EDI. So business approaches to EDI means the use of EDI in our business. So EDI has emerged as a business tool. It supports some of the key management philosophies of the day, like of the day means nowadays it is in practice. Day, like some of the key management philosophy of the day, like just in time. I told you what is just in time. Then efficient consumer response, how efficiently the consumer response will be taken care of, because that is another way in which we can increase the volume of our sales or exports in this context. Therefore, it is time for re-engineering business processes with the help of EDI. EDI is a business issue. So it is time now, it is high time for re-engineering business processes through this EDI with the help of EDI. In 4.8.2, you can see in detail how an EDI plan is developed. How you will develop an EDI plan. It is essential to look into making an EDI champion in each company. Each company should have a champion who will look after this EDI. It is useful to understand the status of EDI in your industry. How far in your industry, the industry in which you are working, how far EDI has been implemented. Then management should support EDI implementation by giving internal training to the staff involved in the EDI project. EDI is taken to be a project, and in this project, those who are involved, they should get from time to time proper training, and you should discuss with them, and proper training procedure should be there. So this is all regarding this EDI. Now we'll come to the last unit, that is fifth unit. that is processing of an export order. That's the last unit in this, you can say, in this book. Just a minute, I'm getting it. Yes. So unit 5, processing of an export order. So the objective of this unit is, in your book it is given, after studying this unit, you should be able to describe different stages, preparation and processing of documents for pre-shipment and post-shipment formalities. Then explain specific points to be examined while confirming the receipt of the export order. Explain documentary requirements for obtaining excise and customs clearance of export cargo. Describe formalities for claiming major export incentives and enumerate documents to be submitted to the bank. So many organizations are involved in this: the bank, the customs department, the importer himself, the exporter, the freight, and your shipping companies. All these are concerned. So how it will be required, or how we'll process an export order, it is the subject matter of this unit, that is the unit 5. So coming to the introduction of part of it. Sorry, I have to arrange this accordingly. Okay. We have learned the regulatory framework of foreign trade, the export sales contract, the range of documentation formalities in export-import trade, and electronic data interchange system in Unit 1, 2, 3, and 4. Just now we have finished Unit 4. So in Unit 1, 2, 3, 4, all these things have been discussed. An export exercise is concluded necessarily after the exporter has been able to deliver the consignment in accordance with the export contract and receive payment for the goods. So what is the next thing which we have to read? That is how we can export the goods. How the export of goods will be feasible practically, and what is the ultimate aim? To receive our money, to receive the sale proceeds. In this unit, you learn various steps involved in the processing of an export order as per shipment, shipment and post-shipment stages, that is pre-shipment and post-shipment stages. You will also learn various formalities of claiming export incentive, because not only that, you will also get some money or some concession, some incentives from the government itself. So all these things, how it will be done. This is the concluding concluding unit. So all these things are to be read. So first is nature and format of export order. So here what we will read is these things we will be reading. 1 minute, let me. So after knowing the objectives, then introduction, nature and format of export order, examination and confirmation of export order, manufacturing or procuring goods, central excise clearance, pre-shipment inspection, sorry, appointment of clearing and forwarding agents, then transportation of goods to port shipment, port formalities and customs clearance, dispatch of documents by forwarding agent to the exporter, certificate of origin and shipment advice, presentation of documents to bank, claiming export incentives, etc. So coming to the first three, four things, that is nature and format of export order, examination and confirmation of export order. First of all, you will receive the export order. After receiving the export order, you have to confirm it. And after confirming the export order, you will go for your manufacturing or procuring goods. If you have already manufactured, then you can procure it easily. Otherwise, you will go for manufacturing. Or if you are collecting it from different, companies or different industries, different factories, then you have to consult them and they will make the supply and you will get it. Then central exercise clearance will be required. After doing all these collections, first of all, what you have to do is you have to go for the clearance of central excise. There is one department called Central Excise Department which will approve your export. So after getting clearance from them, you will have to make the pre-shipment inspection. I told you that for quality control, in order to secure the position, secure the image of our country, there is inspection. So pre-shipment inspection will have to be made, and that will have to be arranged. And then after that, appointment of clearing and forwarding agents. Clearing and forwarding agents are those agents who will get it from you and send it to the importers. You have to appoint them. Depending on their charges, etc., you will decide whom should you choose. Then, after appointing the clearing and forwarding agents, the transportation of goods to port of shipment. Suppose we will be sending it through Paradip port up to the Paradip port, how these goods will be transported. Transportation goods to port of shipment. Then port formalities and customs clearance. There again, there are certain formalities in the port. The post of authorities, they will charge something, then these dock charges will be there. Then the government customs department will be there. They will be having give us some clearance. And after that, dispatch of documents by forwarding agent to the exporter. Suppose we are exporting to another country, so the exporter is sitting somewhere else. So what you have to do is you have to send the documents. To whom you will send the documents? You have to send the documents to the forwarding agents. Then certificate of origin and shipment of advice. So these are all documents which I have already discussed. These documents will have to prepare and send to them. Then presentation of documents to bank. After getting this, all these things, we will give to the bank these documents. Our bank. So our bank, because our bank, on the basis of these documents, after receiving it from the exporter, will submit it to the bank, and the bank, excuse me, and the bank here in India will have to send it to a bank of the exporter in another country. From that, it will collect by providing these documents, which we have handed over to our bank, and the bank has sent it to that bank. From that bank, again, money will be coming to our bank, which we will receive. So this is the process. Then claiming export incentives. We have received, but in addition, some extra money, some extra incentive money will be received from the government also. That also we will have to claim. There are certain formalities that you will read in 5.13. So all these things are there in your unit 5. So thus we are concluding this lecture, and now you can ask me the questions, if any, and we will discuss about that. Thank you. Students, are you listening me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is there any question?
No, sir. Actually, sir, would you like to share some important questions according to this block one?
Yes. Shivani,
Yes, sir.
I could not get it clearly. Please tell me what is your question.
Sir, would you like to share some important questions according to this block one?
Actually, questions are there in your. I shall tell you practical things. Questions are already the long questions and short questions are objective type questions, etc. are there in your booklet itself. Have you got the booklets or not?
Yes, sir.
So if you have got the booklet with you, there are questions. Actually, these questions are very important, very terminal questions. Like how EDI is different from electronic commerce, how EDI has become a necessity for international trade. I think point is that we have already discussed all these things, isn't it?
Yes,
What is ED? What is EDFAC? What are the other EDI standards? What is the role of them? I do not claim that everything I have discussed, but most of the things I have already touched. And I think going through the booklet, you can get the answers of all the questions. The questions are very much there in your booklet itself. So these are the important questions. And if you want to have more important questions, then you can through your I mean net, you can get all the questions of the previous years. Okay, I think those previous questions will be of much use to you, and you can get a number of questions.
yes,
Uh, am I clear?
yes, sir.
Because nobody keeps the questions with them. If you can collect it from somebody, it is okay, but it is better that from the last year questions are available in the net from that IGNOU itself. Okay, so you can
Yes,
get all these questions.
yes.
If you have got any doubt regarding anything, we can discuss. Anybody else? Actually, what you will have to do after this lecture, if you have not read the books till now, you can always go uh, through those books, and now it will be more clearly understandable, and you will also getting interest in order to read through that, because all the things which I have discussed, just I have given the introductions, or you can say in a nutshell, I have already discussed everything. So what you will have to do is go into detail, and the detailed things are available there. And if you go for further studies also, it is available. Those reference books names have already been given in the book. So from that book itself, you can get a lot of things, and even the important questions you can prepare yourself. Thank you.
Doctors, how is the class over?
Actually, I have already completed the 5 units,
Okay.
all the 5 units, and I have asked them for some questions. Only one student asked me regarding the important questions. I had given the information that the questions can be got from your book itself. It is already there. I have just shown them some questions also. And in addition, I told them that you can go through net also. You can get it from IGNOU. All the last year's questions, that is previous year's questions. It will be of much help to you.
Right, sir. Thanks a lot.
And there is no other question. So we can stop here.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thanks a lot,
Okay.
sir.
Okay, thank you, sir.